Hello, everyone. Welcome again to our webinar series, Grace and Speed, Muskoka's Wooden Boat Stories. This is episode 6 and our second last episode of this series. My name is John Miller, president of Muskoka Steamships and Discovery Center. I'd like to acknowledge the First Peoples who, for thousands of years before us, were and are still the keepers and caretakers of this land where we now live and work. We're dedicated to honoring the Indigenous history and culture and committed to moving forward in the spirit of reconciliation and respect with all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. And in particular for Muskoka, all 4 cultures, the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat, and Métis that inhabited these lands either currently or historically. We recognize all the generations of Indigenous people and their historic connection to this place, and we're grateful for the opportunity to gather here at this time. So this series is a digital component of our revitalization project at the Muskoka Discovery Center. The physical transformation of our building will be complete in the next 3 or 4 months, with 3 dynamic exhibits being created, growing and evolving with inspired content and due to open in the spring of 2023. Those exhibits are Evolving Muskoka, an exhibit about how, through a process of conflict and resolution, the storied area of Ontario evolved after first contact to become one of the most important tourist destinations in the world. Muskoka, Confluence of Cultures. This is an Indigenous presentation about 4 Indigenous cultures with a presence in Muskoka for over 13,000 years, all of which have teachings to share about sustainability and care for our environment. And Wanda 3, a 108-year-old steam yacht presently in the middle of an electrification repowerment. Wanda is a 94-foot 94-foot wooden vessel, and she'll be a working artifact and an important symbol of sustainability when complete. The Muskoka Steamships and Discovery Center, in partnership with Antique and Classic Boat Society, is excited to present this series of 8 webinars showcasing wooden works of art that have made Muskoka home to arguably the best concentration of quality wooden boats in the world. Our volunteer team of Chris Bullen, Ian Turnbull, Mary Story, Murray Walker, Ed Skinner, and Rick Terry, along with all the boat owners and builders, have put in countless hours to produce this series, and we're extremely grateful for their contributions, all of which are volunteers. I'd like to thank Jordan Waynes and Ann Curley, who are also behind the scenes making this webinar happen. The entire series will be, when complete, will be available in our archives, on our website, and as a permanent display within the Muskoka Discovery Center. Following the video presentation tonight, which is 40 minutes long, we'll have a Q&A with our panelists. It's an exciting part of the webinar, so please post some questions during the presentation and we'll read them to the panelists. Today's presentation is entitled Go Fast Part 2. Please enjoy.
Good to be back with you for episode 6 of Muskoka Wooden Boat Stories. Last week, we had the first of 2 episodes on Go Fast Boats. And this week, in the second episode, we look at Alzed, 1933 Minute Shields Ventnor design, Silver King, 1927 Gold Cup Racer by Dishburn, Scud 2, 1930 Minute Shields, and Shadow 2, a 1936 Minute Shields, once again, a Ventnor design. The gentleman's racer, Alzed, was ordered by the Eaton family from Minette Shields and lived for decades in the Windermere area with several owners before becoming part of an antique boat collection in the United States. But finally she returned to her current home on Lake Joseph. As this advertisement says, Minette Shields in Bracebridge were the Canadian Associates of Ventnor Boat Works located in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Alzed's design is very similar to the boat shown in this 1938 advertisement for Ventnor race boats. This July 7th, 1937 Globe and Mail article trumpets the Minette Shields Ventnor boats that won the CNE's World Championship races. Shadow 2 is the boat in the middle of the 3. Shadow 2 is now owned by Jeff Reed and built in 1936 by Minette Shields, designed by Ventnor and therefore similar to Alzed. She was built to compete in the Duke of York Cup Raceboat Series in England and she is now powered by a fully restored 1200 cubic inch Hispano-Suiza engine. Silver King was built for John Ringling of Ringling Brothers Circus in New York. Built just before the recession, she was never raced. She lived in the United States for years, returned to Lake Muskoka, back to the States, and finally back to Lake Joseph with her steward, Jeff Reed. In the film in this episode, we'll also meet Scud 2. Here she is scudding along Lake Bays, where her first owner, Cameron Peck, had a cottage and a fine collection of wooden boats. Scud as a name is most likely short for Scudder, which means fast runner. If she is called Scud 2, there must have been an earlier Scud. Here is a picture of the first Scud from that same fine collection of pictures for Cameron Peck's boats. We know little about Scud, but we can deduce a fair bit from pictures. This is why pictures of boats over the years are so valuable. They tell us stories about the times they've seen. To me, Scud looks like an early Manette, built a decade or more before Scud 2. Notice her folding top, like a convertible top on a car. In this picture, you can see her name clearly, along with a few scratches on her hull, indicating that she's got lots of use. And this picture shows that lots of use might entail landing in rough places like this dock. Looks like she was carrying about 11 people on this occasion. And here she is at the dock at home in Lake Bays with her top up. Here's a great example of stories we can deduce from a picture. The picture's taken from the mother-in-law's seat in Scud. First of all, look at the landscape in the background. This is one of the many fine, long reaches on Lake Bays. Second, the ladies driving look very happy and very much in control. But the fellow in the stern seat, not so much. And this is a closer look. It looks like he might be scowling just a little bit, in contrast to the very content ladies. But he's graduated now to captain, with the cap to prove it. But he still doesn't look all that happy. This picture is a testament to Burt Manette's hardware design and function. Note the detail in the windshield. Let's move on now to Scud 2, as magnificently captured in pictures when she was owned by Cameron Peck. Note her soft top or convertible top. Here she is at the dock with her very distinctive bow light atop the bow stem. And a closer look at the bow light. And here she is with a hardtop and a lifeboat to boot. And this is our captain again, looking a little happier. Note the windshield design. And this is our last picture of Scud 2 on Lake Bays, with Wanda 3 in the background. Wanda 3 at the time was part of Cameron Peck's collection. In 1930, he purchased Wanda 3 for $7,000 from Mrs. Timothy Eaton of Lake Rossall. The yacht went by water to Gravenhurst, by rail to Huntsville, by water through Ferry and Peninsula Lakes, and finally by rollers up and over the portage from Peninsula Lake to Lake Bays. Wanda 3 lived on Lake Bays before being acquired by the Muskoka steamships and making a return trip to Gravenhurst by truck in 1993. She is now living in her brand new state-of-the-art boathouse at the Muskoka Discovery Center. Scud 2 was built in 1930. The almost identical Glen Avie 2 was built in 1931. Note the distinct light atop the bow stem and the windshield. Jolly Roger is another hull of the same design as Scud 2, built in the same year. she displays a pirate theme. And this is Scud 2's original Scud engine, rebuilt and ready for installation. In the Q&A session following a recent episode, we discussed water cooling a marine engine. I took this short video with my phone the day we filmed Scud 2, capturing that big, beautiful Scud engine starting up. Here we go. The engine starts and there's no water coming out of the exhaust because the water pump is busy pulling the water from the lake and pumping it through that big engine. While we're waiting for the water to make it to the exhaust, notice the beauty of Manette Shield's hardware. The rudder, the rack and pinion, all reflected in the varnish finish of the transom. And then finally, after about 50 seconds, here comes the water. And now to Chris Bullen's film with Murray Walker interviewing Dominic Gesualdi and Jeff Reed.
To everyone listening, we're very fortunate this morning to having two antique boat collectors with us that are both involved with boats that run rather fast. And Dominic, I'll start with you because you just came in from, I think, a rather exciting run with Alzed. Can you tell us a little bit about the boat in terms of when it was built and its history on the lakes?
It was built in 1933. Story has it, or rumor has it, that it was commissioned by one of the Eatons or one of his sons, legitimate or illegitimate, so the story goes. The boat spent all its life in Muskoka for many, many years. Ended up Mittler Collection down in Michigan, and we got word that it might be for sale. It was unrestored. Through our mutual friend Gary Clark, we were able to bring the boat up, restore the boat. We actually took the step out of it because it's a very squirrely boat. It has spent time, I believe, at the bottom of Lake Rosso a couple of times. Skinner was just telling me a story about took a number of years to let it sit there and find the right equipment and right divers to get it up, but eventually it made it up. So we've enjoyed it for, I think it's going on 10 years now. My sons love it because it's a lot of speed. I've actually got the throttle governed so they don't go too crazy. So
well, that's an important thing.
So it's a lot of fun, and usually if the weather's good and it's nice and flat on an early Saturday morning, I'm rip-roaring around Lake Joe on it. So excellent. By myself or whoever wants to get scared.
Very nice.
Yeah.
tell us about your search for Silver King, because that's such an important ditch burn and has such an interesting history, which I hope you can tell us about who it was built for.
I found it in Gibraltar Island 12 years ago. I fell in love with it at that time. I was able to buy it from the owner, but did a lot of modifications to it. Had a large single step that I got rid of very quickly. The engine is a Hispano Suiza, 1922, 850 cubic inches. That was an engine I bought afterward and replaced the engine in Silver King. The engine when I bought it was a Chrysler Crown, I believe. It's a big old engine and it's reasonably fast.
And it sounds terrific on the water.
It has a great sound, great sound.
Can you go back a little bit in history, because that boat has a very interesting provenance in terms of who it was built for originally?
Well, it was originally built for the Ringling, one of the Ringling brothers. Spent its first 30 years in Sarasota Bay. Had a couple of owners down there, and then I guess it was brought to Lake Muskoka after that, where I took over.
Well, it's always good to hear about a boat that's come back home to Canada.
Yeah, came
after
back
being
home to Canada because it's a ditch burn and it should be here.
That's good. Excellent. Now, speaking of boats that should be here and are here, Dominic, Scud was a fascinating boat to go out in this morning, especially with its power. It's, I believe, a 1930 Manette Shields. Can you tell us a little bit about the engine especially, and the kind of speed that you get with a very low RPM?
Well, it's unusual to find an antique boat with the original motor, and this boat fortunately had its original Scud motor. It went down to be redone by Mr. Mishko, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
I believe he did the Hispano Suiza too, Jeff?
Yes, he did.
So we have something else in common.
Yes, I brought your motor back from Tennessee.
Great guy. Unfortunately, he's not doing too well. I hear he's not doing well with his eyesight, so it'll be a loss to the
Yeah,
the
it sure
boating
will
world.
be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, labor of love. Boats, basically totally redone. It's not the original stain color on it. We went a little darker, but the motor itself has got a lot of history, and like I said, it's unusual to find an antique boat with the original motor.
But great to see it done up so well and performing so well.
Well, it's got a huge flywheel on it, and it seems to like 1750 RPM, and it's just gliding along at a decent clip. And as you witnessed and enjoyed this morning, it's a fun boat. It really can. It's got a bit of giddy up too. So for a launch type boat. So
now you're both fortunate in having quite a number of boats. But Dominic, you were saying how you like to get out in all of your boats every week and spend some time out there, which I think is great.
Yes, it is, and we enjoy them, take good care of them, and always manage to have one of the boats going for a little tune-up at Gary Clark's shop in the winter. Just keep them tuned up. I know we enjoy all the boats. Charisma. We just bought Pushpinuk off of Lake Muskoka. It's going to need some repair, and we also enjoy some of the Italian boats. I hate to say it here. No, I don't hate to do actually enjoy our Riva too. So.
Yes. Good. Well, it's good that you enjoy it, and I think we can talk all about the history, which is so important, and we can talk about the provenance and everything else. But the best part to me is that we can also be out in the water and have fun with them.
Well, just like you're asking me questions, when we have a visitor or somebody that's never been in one of these boats, there's a repeat of history. So a little bit of history gets told or said and repeated. So it's kind of neat.
Jeff, do you find the same thing when people are visiting you, that they may pick a favorite boat when they're looking at your fleet?
Yes, I guess they do. The most exciting one is the Shadow 2 with a 1,200 cubic inch Hispano Suiza, and it's very fast for an 18-foot boat. That really attracts people's attention.
Well, that's one of the interesting things about Muskoka, is that the fast boats are really what put some of the Muskoka builders on the map.
That's right.
With the early rainbow boats that propelled Ditchburn into fame. The same could be said of Gravettes, of course, with the Miss Canada series.
Right.
But then there are the others that, unfortunately, you have one of them with your boats, several of them actually, that are boats that people may not know about. And I think it's so important that you're able to come out today and bring something like Silver King that we don't get to see that often, but
No.
it's not only a performer, it's a boat of beauty and quite frankly, a work of art.
You just got to keep them running, that's all.
Yeah. Well, you're very capable, both of you, at getting them done that way.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
Nice.
I'm glad we were able to spend some time this morning.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Welcome.
Next, we return for a visit with one of the 6 gentlemen's racers Minette Shields built in the early 30s. Despite the economy in the early 30s, wealthy young men were keen to purchase sports runabouts, the on-water equivalent to sports cars of the times. All the sports runabouts had bottoms designed by John Hacker, the naval architect Bert Minette worked with in Algonac, Michigan, about 1909. Bert designed the sleek craft from the waterline up. Bryson sold the boats to the young gentleman. Altair, 1933, we'll look at, Shadow, 1934, Fancy Lady, 1934, and Black Knight, also 1934. Here is Altair on Lake of Bays, part of Cameron Peck's collection. She remains with the Peck family to this day. And this is Shadow, built for Charles Wheaton in 1934. Earlier in this episode, we met Shadow 2, also built for Charles Wheaton. And here is Black Knight. We met her in episode 2. And here is Fancy Lady. We're going to learn more about her now. Fancy Lady was almost lost. After World War II, Rob's dad, Bob Purvis, came upon Fancy Lady in a field. He purchased the boat for $100. But for that, the boat may have been lost. Rob tells this story in the film. The ancient typing you see on the bottom of this slide is a direct copy from specifications written by Minette Shields. It says, "Rudder to be of such a design that the boat will take efficient turns and will work smoothly and evenly from the steering wheel without annoyance of drag or pull to starboard or port. In order to prevent the possibility of capsizing on turns, the rudder will be protected by 2 duraluminum fins fastened to the transom. You see them in the bottom of this shot. But here's a close-up view of those duralumin, that's hard to say, fins that we mentioned in the last slide. This is what sometimes is called in the trade as the back porch on Fancy Lady. The exhaust fittings also are described in the specifications. Outboard exhaust fittings to our special pattern, nickel-plated and flanged to meet the transom. Fittings extend considerable distance beyond the transom so that the transom will not become dirty from exhaust fumes. And now we have Chris Boland's Fancy Lady film. Again, listen carefully to Rob's story.
So back in the 30s, my father went to camp on Tobin Island, a camp run by Brian and Alan Vaughn at Linger Longer. Cottage is still there, owned by the Vaughns, a conglomerate of 4 or 5 cottages now. And while he was there, he used to see boats like the Fancy Lady, and which was called the Undine at the time. Undine, just by the way, is a very fancy water nymph and in a lovely flowing gown if you look it up on the internet. After he went off to war and came back, got married, started a family, a good friend of his said, "Come on, Bob, we're going to go up to Keswick to look at a boat that I want to buy." It was a twin screw of some sort. This fella placed on Georgian Bay at the time. Father said, "Great, it'd be a nice day trip." So they go up there. While they're looking at this twin screw, which ended up inappropriate, there was a boat on a trailer under some canvas, and my father asked, "Oh, let's have a look at this. What's this over here?" And they opened it up, and by God, it was an 18-foot Minette Shields gentleman's racer. It was the Undine itself, which had been owned by Phil Seagram, who was killed during the war, unfortunately, and his family had sold it to Dawson's. Dawson's wanted $500 for the boat. My father didn't have $500. He said, "What happens if you take the engine out? How much do you want?" And they said $100. He says, "A deal." The trailer was included. The boat was towed back down to Toronto, and it sat in our driveway for a year or so. This is 1949, as I recall. In 1950, they bought the piece of property that we have our cottage on, and in 1951 started restoring the Fancy Lady. Some self-restoration, but mostly was done by Herb Budd. Now, a really interesting story is that Father had all of the chrome fittings in the back of his car halfway through this project, and he was going to take them to a chroming place in Toronto. The car was stolen, never recovered, so all the fittings were lost. He spent the next year going to Hideaway Island looking at the RJ. He met Charlie Wheaton because of this. He'd go up to his place on Lake Joe. And Harley Nielsen's, who happened to be a friend of my grandfather's. And all the fittings were made from wooden patterns carved by my father, who was actually a pretty good carver. The boat was eventually powered by a Chrysler Crown. That was one of the original engines. The gray Phantom, 96 horsepower, was the other engine that went in some of the boats. And that was our mode of transportation for quite a few years. Because the boat had sat out for so long, there was some issues with the hull. And in 1957, 58, somewhere in there, new sides and bottom were put on by the Ames brothers, mostly because the Ames brothers had a line on some very fine mahogany. I think some of it was even African mahogany, which was pretty much dead by then. But they were building a big boat for Doug Brown up in Lake Joe, and they had extra wood, and so my father got a deal for them to do the Fancy Lady at the same time. The decks, by the way, are original. The engine been rebuilt a couple of times. It's now got an interceptor in it, thanks to a Jack Titstall. It has Thunderbird intake manifold and a 4-barrel carburetor sitting on top of the engine, which is a lot safer than the original Carter's 2 barrels at either end of the block that came with the original Interceptor. My father died 40 years ago. I've been looking after the boat ever since.
Every episode of this series has focused on stewardship, but next week we're going to look at boats that survived colorful commercial lives, and they survived thanks to stewardship. We conclude next week with hearing Megan Walker's perspective on the beauty, the joy, and the stewardship of wooden boats. We wrap up this episode with a brief film by Chris Bullen. He's spliced together a few choice scenes capturing the fun we had last summer getting the video for this series. Watch for the incredible scene where he's filming held in a two. Rick McGraw suggests that Chris crawl forward on the deck right up to the bow stem, turn and shoot back, all while the boat is underway. The intrepid Chris took Rick's suggestion and did it. Watch carefully, you'll see his toes in the shot. Enjoy and join us in the laughter at the end.
Yeah, I'm getting there.
You can drive it as long as you dock it. The guy said, oh shit, I don't know how I'm going to do that. But Tim said, okay, tell you what, I'll handle the gears. You just handle the steering wheel and the gap. So the guy said, okay, I don't know. So they're coming into one of these two slabs and get so that the bow is just going in the slip. And Tim's about to throw it in reverse. And the guy shuts it off. And it comes in and slices into, I don't know, at least one of these boards. Like right that far into the board. And everybody's sitting there in stunned silence, expecting that, all these side planks are cooked. Silence, 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 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds. Tim hasn't erupted yet. He doesn't know what to do. Silence. He's never been silent for 15 seconds in his life. And then finally, my buddy turns to him and says, you know what they say up in the French River, Tim? When you get into trouble, just shut her down.
I wanted to say up front before the Q&A got going too far that I made a mistake in talking about Wanda 3, indicating she'd been bought in 1930 by Cameron Peck, and that is not true. She was bought by Orlando Shaw, and nobody knows that better than Mary and me, because we researched all that a year or so ago, but when I was making this, I made that mistake. So now that error is corrected. On with the Q&A.
And we have lots of questions this week. So let's start off with, so the first question is, were seabirds and dukes similar, except seabirds were made on Rosso side of Port Carling and dukes were on Lake Muskoka side?
Yes. We need Ed Skinner here because for 32 years he ran dukes. But they were in some ways similar. In some ways, Seabird had many more models. They experimented more and actually had some pretty interesting designs, actually. Whereas Duke's had a kind of a progressive evolutionary style, I guess, that took you from year to year and boat to boat. But yeah, they built similar sized boats and similar constructions.
Okay. So the next question comes from someone who's watching today, who was very fortunate to tour Lake Joseph with a mechanic that he worked with as a kid. He went to Doug Bassett's boathouse, and at the time, Pissed Off was in the boathouse, and he has pictures of it. The story he was told was that Doug asked his wife, "What do you think of all my boats?" To which she answered, "Pissed Off." Online, it indicates the builder usually built sailboats, but agreed to build this boat, and it was called that because he was pissed off of building it. Can you shed some light on this tale? Is it because of the wife, or is it because of building the sailboats or the boat?
I heard the story about the wife. I didn't hear the one about Vic Carpenter.
That's the story I heard about the wife as well, and that's the one we tell when it was in the boathouse. So.
I've heard both stories as well, and of course, who knows what is the accurate one? But they both make for good stories, so perhaps they'll continue that way.
Now I have two stories to tell. There are many throughout the series. Many of the boats have been repowered because of the engines could not be rebuilt. Were any of these engines saved? It seems some of them would have been a marvel to keep on display.
I know in some cases where there's actually a dock near Port Carling, the entire crib work of the dock isn't made with rocks, it's made with old engines that were dropped down there. On the other hand, there are people like Matt Fairbrass, an excellent motor or engine mechanic who has almost a barn full of old engines that he's collected along the way. And then there are those of us that have some old engines that are in a boat, and others that we've stored and think that we're going to use them at some day. Who knows?
Okay, there's also mention that some boats were almost lost. What happened to the hundreds of boats that were built in Muskoka?
Well, I can answer that question with one example. Ian and I retrieved a Ditchburn Viking from Mortimer's. There was a back lot there that had been a quarry of some sort, and I know for a fact, and there were lots of evidence of that they burnt their traded boats that were traded in on fiberglass boats, and they would often just burn them. And Ian and I salvaged what was then called the mint julep, but it wasn't in very good condition, and we stored it for quite a number of years until somebody that wanted to restore it and could afford to do that was able to take it.
There are other stories as well of people that scuttled their boats in the middle of the lake. They simply took them out, removed some of the hardware if that's what they wanted. Other times they simply put some rocks in the boat and chopped a hole in the bottom, and down it went. There are some rather exciting stories recently of people that thought there was a boat in their bay and hired a diver to go down, and sure enough, they came up with, I think in the case that I recall was a ditch burn. They thought they were looking for a dippy, but they ended up with a ditch burn. So there's lots and lots of stories.
Great. Is the spotlight on the Manette Shields boats special?
There were two models of a spotlight called the Ray. There was a half-mile Ray and a 1 mile Ray. They were built by a third party, maybe Perco, but I'm not sure. But a lot of the hardware was, a lot of the operating hardware was bought on the open market. A lot of the castings for some of the navigation lights and that kind of thing were custom to the boat.
Okay. How easy is it to find a shop that restores or maintains the engines?
I'll take a little shot at that one. Admittedly, there are less restoration shops for engines than there used to be, but there are still several excellent ones that people are going to. In the movie, they talked about Mr. Mishkov in Tennessee. Matt Fairbrass in Port Carling does excellent work. Mr. Titchell, I believe, over near the Peterborough area, does some excellent work. And I think there are others as well. But I think for anyone who's looking to have an engine restored, it's important to get someone who's familiar with marine engines. Very recently, I heard of someone who went to a regular automotive repair, and they ran into some difficulties because they weren't used to the fact that it's just raw water running through these engines, not glycol like an automotive engine. So it's important to pick someone who has some experience in that, but they really do exist and do excellent work.
And most of the marinas send out their engines to these people that Murray has just named.
Okay. Was it only Manette shields that insert the navigation lights into the side of the boat?
Yes, in Muskoka anyway, it was part of their styling, their style cue, I guess. Some of the others emphasized very elaborate castings with chrome and nickel, but it was a styling thing.
Okay. What was Rob adjusting on the dash while driving Fancy Lady?
This throttle.
Yeah, the gents racers, the gentlemen racers, typically had throttles in the dash. They were an aircraft throttle, and in the specifications, and we showed some of those in this particular episode. In the specifications, at one point, Manette Shields pointed out that for the racers, there wasn't enough circumference in the throttle when it's on the wheel, where you turn it with your hand like that. And so the throttle was an aircraft throttle mounted in the dash, where you could push it in and out.
Okay. What made the step bottoms undesirable? Were they unstable at speed?
Well, Mike Windsor tells some stories because I built a boat and I was encouraging him to put a step in it. And he said, well, these steps are black art. He said, unless they're highly engineered, they come up with pretty unpredictable results. And so the objective was to introduce air underneath the hull of the boat so that make the boat more slippery. But as a concept, it was correct, but as an implementation, they generally introduced some really difficult. I think the term I heard in the movie was squirrely handling characteristics.
I think Rick's quite accurate there. The stability question in turns with a stepped hull was a major factor in the racing. Stepped hulls weren't exactly new in the 30s and 40s. The first one, I think, in an international competition was way back in 1905. So the idea of having a stepped hull was certainly, as Rick said, to deal with the air under the boat. But the problem that many boats had was the ability to turn accurately and not go to the bottom, as the case of Alzed that we heard about today. In the 1930s, Harold Wilson, together with Doug Van Patten, and also I think with influence from John Hacker, installed what they called non-trip chines to the stepped hull, and that helped to overcome that problem. It's been very popular in the last 10 or 15 years to put stepped hulls on fiberglass boats, but again, it was a tricky engineering job, and as we can see with some of the modern boats, not all of them have gone with these stepped hull.
Okay. Does Alzed have a turning fin, or is it that the drive shaft that can be seen under the boat at speed?
I think it has a turning fin. Sorry.
Nope.
Well, if we're incorrect, we'll get back to you next week. So the next question is, I see the boats have the steering wheel on the right or left side. How is the placement of the steering wheel decided?
That's a debate that could take us all day. Rick,
Yes.
take a shot at that. Well,
There were two theories, but it was also influenced by history and cars. But one of the elaborate theories was that if the engine turns one way, the steering wheel should be that would tip the boat the other way, and so the steering wheel should be on the high side, so that if there was a single person in the boat driving it, his weight or her weight would offset that tilt. Sometimes people want them to pull a particular way, and that again, that depends on the rotation of the engine. But I think in the end, it was personal choice. And later, because of the right-of-way rules, it's easier to see a boat on the right if you're also sitting on the right. So, as Murray said, there's a lot of debate about something that probably is not so well anchored in fact and design.
Okay. So very little has been said about Doug Van Patten and his design work on Miss Canada 3, the Gravette Streamliners, his work at Minette Shields, Miss Canada 2, and the double concave two-step bottoms. I wanted to bring this to the viewer's attention and ask for your comments.
Doug Van Patten's bottom on Miss Canada 3 was actually, it morphed from Miss Canada 2, which was designed by John Hacker, but it was a boat that had a porpoising problem and it kind of leaped through the water. It was temporarily solved by putting an extra appendage under the hull, but that's not exactly a sound construction model. So with the Miss Canada 3, Doug Van Patten, apparently, as he told me, said he was approached by Gravettes to say, could you build us the fastest boat in the world? And Doug set to that task. He told me 1937 on the 26th of December, right after Christmas. And he finished, I think, on the 11th of January with the complete design ready for construction, which was launched that spring of 1938. Doug seemed to know very much what the pluses and minuses were to the Hacker hull, and I think he kind of reached the zenith of construction in that concave keel knuckle hull, it's sometimes called, and it was highly successful. And of all the hundreds of designs that he did, Doug always mentioned to me that Miss Canada 3 was the best boat he ever designed.
Okay. So one of our participants tonight has built a 42-inch scale replica of Mint Julep. Peter brained to own the boat and permitted me to take measurements. My scale replica is a remote controlled, and every summer he cruises Lake Muskoka with it. My question is, how do I get my hands on drawings for these mahogany boats so that I can make more models?
Mary.
No, we don't have any in the archives at all. I think when the boat builders gave up their businesses, they threw them all in the lake.
Well, there is the line drawings that we've got, several
Yes.
line drawings from, and I believe you have them at the steamships.
Yes, we have those. They were made by the Antique and Classic Boat Society about 15 years ago, where they took
You
the
have
lines.
some crouch design. You have some crouch designs too. I don't know whether there's measurements on them.
Don't think so.
No.
Okay, so that's the questions for tonight. And before we leave the questions, Ian has some information as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to screen share. I think you can see that all right now. And actually, Chris Bowen could speak to this. This is the ACBS.
Oh, yes, we do have
tour.
those.
Chris, you set
Yes,
to go?
so the spring tour, once again, we could not arrange to be in the boat shops because of this COVID. So now we went around to many of the shops, interviewed the owners and the boats, and that'll be coming up. I say on Saturday, April 30th, there'll be 3 different segments, and that'll be on acbs.ca and the ACBS YouTube channel. So you can watch the spring tour from your home instead of running around to the boat shops. But I know that many of the boat shops are eager to have us back, and we're eager to get back next spring. So all things being equal, I hope we'll be back at it. But it's all being put together now, and there's a lot of shops, and you learn a lot. Actually, you learn a lot more about the boats doing it this way, but it's not as fun.
Okay, so
And then
over to
there's-
John. Oh, sorry.
Then
sorry.
there's one more piece of information I just wanted to bring to your attention, and that is, this is a privately arranged, rather casual affair, but it's an awful lot of fun. It's called Muskoka Woody Cruises, and you can see at the bottom there an email address, muskokawoodycruise@gmail, or you can go to Facebook and look for Muskoka Woody Cruises. And it's really a bunch of people who own wood boats who get together on occasional weekends through the cruising season. It's all coordinated by a good man named John Bosomworth, who lives on Tobin Island. So those of us who are able to go out and join at a specified time and find a route that he shares, so that we've all got that, and we just have a good casual time and see a lot of boats you might not otherwise see. So it's a good privately arranged get together. It's quite different from the Vintage Boating Day, which we were talking about a little bit earlier. The Vintage Boating Day is an ACBS event, and maybe Chris or somebody else could talk about that.
Yeah, it's something that arrived after after COVID, since we couldn't get together with anybody. We said, well, we can get together in boats. We're far enough from everybody, and so that started on the first week of August in 2020, when the MLA show was also canceled. So we gathered together with the MLA, and it was a very successful event, and we did it last year as well. Again, and it's held in 4 or 5 different locations. And this year it'll be on August 20th. And we'll meet up in Lake Muskoka, Lake Rosso. There's another event out in Peterborough, and the one in Ottawa, I believe. I just have to go to our acbs.ca website, and you'll see when we get closer to that. I don't think it's all been planned out yet, but it's a fun event to get everybody out in their boats, and it's very casual, and we just all meet up in a specified location, just like the Woody Boater Cruises, except we just have one day and go boating just to get the boats running. Everybody likes to be out with more than one Woody boat, because then if something happens, you'll always get home.
Great. Okay, that's all the questions, Ann?
Yes, it is.
Awesome. Well, our thanks again to our panelists and our boat owners, all the volunteers that have worked on this production. Jordan tells me that we had over, there's Ed. Hello, Ed. Jordan tells me we had over 400 registrants for tonight, and we've got over 1,000 views of these webinars on our YouTube channel. So please, again, they're all being recorded. If you'd like to see them, just go to our website, realmuskoka.com. Next week is our final episode, episode 7. So till then, please have a safe week, and we'll see you next week. Thanks very much.